Have you ever heard of a city so utterly destroyed that its enemies were said to have sown salt into its fields, cursing the land for eternity? This isn't just a legend. It's the final, brutal chapter in the story of Carthage, a magnificent city that dared to challenge the might of Rome. Today we journey back in time, not just to witness the fall of a city, but the annihilation of a civilization. This is the story of the Third Punic War and the tragic end of Carthage. For over a century, Rome and Carthage were locked in a titanic struggle for control of the Mediterranean. They were the two superpowers of the ancient world. The First and Second Punic Wars had been devastating. You've probably heard of Hannibal, the brilliant Carthaginian general who crossed the Alps with elephants and brought Rome to its knees. But after his ultimate defeat at the Battle of Zama, Carthage was left broken and humbled. They were stripped of their overseas territories, their navy was dismantled, and they were forced to pay a crushing war indemnity to Rome. Crucially, they were forbidden from waging war without Rome's permission. For 50 years, a fragile peace held. Carthage, ever the merchant city, focused on trade and slowly rebuilt its wealth, becoming prosperous once again. But in Rome, this recovery was watched with suspicion and envy. The old wounds had not healed. In the Roman Senate, one voice rose above all others, a constant chilling reminder of the old enemy. Marcus Porcius Cato, known as Cato the Elder, was a powerful and respected senator. No matter the topic of debate, whether it was about aqueducts or taxes, he would end every single speech with the same 5 words: Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. This wasn't just political rhetoric, it was a reflection of a deep-seated fear and hatred within the Roman elite. They saw Carthage's renewed prosperity not as a success story, but as a future threat. They remembered the terror of Hannibal at their gates and swore it would never happen again. The seeds of the final conflict were being sown not on a battlefield, but in the heart of the Roman Forum. The spark that finally lit the powder keg came not from Carthage, but from its neighbor, the Numidian kingdom, led by the aging King Massinissa. Massinissa was a staunch ally of Rome, and, knowing Carthage's hands were tied, he began systematically encroaching on Carthaginian territory. He would seize farmlands, raid towns, and provoke Carthage at every turn. Carthage sent desperate appeals to Rome, asking for intervention, asking for justice. But Rome's response was always the same. They sided with their ally, Massinissa. The Romans were playing a long game, pushing Carthage into a corner, waiting for them to break the terms of the peace treaty. They were giving Carthage a choice: be slowly eaten alive by the Numidians, or fight back and face the full wrath of Rome. In 151 BC, after decades of enduring these provocations, Carthage finally snapped. They raised an army to defend their borders against yet another Numidian incursion. This was the moment Rome had been waiting for. The treaty was broken. For Rome, this was the ultimate justification. An embassy was sent to Carthage, not to negotiate, but to deliver an ultimatum. The Romans demanded that Carthage hand over 300 children from their noblest families as hostages. It was a cruel, heartbreaking demand, but hoping to appease the Romans and avoid war, the Carthaginians complied. We can only imagine the tears and terror as those children were sent away, a sacrifice for a peace that would never come. With the hostages secured in Sicily, the Roman consuls landed their army, numbering some 80,000 men, near the Carthaginian city of Utica, which had already defected to their side. Another Carthaginian delegation went to meet them, expecting to hear the final terms of peace. What they heard instead was the death sentence for their city. The Romans demanded that the Carthaginians surrender all of their weapons and armor. Stunned, but still desperate to avoid annihilation, the city complied. Wagon after wagon creaked out of Carthage, piled high with 200,000 sets of armor, countless spears, swords, and 2,000 catapults. The city was now completely disarmed. It was then, with Carthage defenseless, that the Romans delivered their final unthinkable demand. The people of Carthage were to abandon their city. They were to move at least 10 miles inland. The city of Carthage itself, their home for centuries, a jewel on the Mediterranean coast, was to be utterly destroyed. This was a betrayal of unimaginable proportions. The Carthaginians had given up their children, their weapons, their dignity, all for nothing. The Roman demand was not about security, it was about eradication. When the envoys returned to the city with the news, the initial shock and despair quickly turned into a furious, unified resolve. The city gates were slammed shut. The Roman envoys who had remained in the city were killed. The people of Carthage chose defiance over exile. They would die in their homes rather than abandon them. An incredible transformation took place. The entire city became a weapons factory. Temples were stripped of their gold and silver to fund the war effort. Public buildings were torn down for timber to build a new fleet. Slaves were freed to become soldiers. The women of Carthage famously cut off their long hair to be braided into ropes for the catapults. Everyone, from the highest noble to the lowest laborer, worked day and night, forging weapons and preparing for the siege. They had been stripped of everything, but they had found their courage. The siege of Carthage would last for 3 long, grueling years. The Romans, expecting a quick victory against a disarmed city, were shocked by the ferocity of the resistance. The newly built Carthaginian walls held strong. Their small, hastily constructed fleet launched daring raids on the Roman navy. The Roman campaign was plagued by incompetence and disease. The first 2 years saw a stalemate, with the Romans making little headway. But in 147 BC, a new general arrived to take command, Scipio Aemilianus, the adopted grandson of the great Scipio Africanus, the man who had defeated Hannibal. Scipio was young, energetic, and ruthless. He restored discipline to the Roman army and systematically tightened the noose around Carthage. He built a massive mole, a stone causeway to block the city's harbor, cutting off all supplies from the sea. The Carthaginians responded with a feat of incredible engineering and desperation. They dug a new channel to the sea from behind their own harbor and secretly built another fleet of 50 ships. But their desperate breakout attempt failed. Starvation began to grip the city. In the spring of 146 BC, the final assault began. Roman legions breached the walls and poured into the city. What followed was not a battle, but a week-long massacre. The fighting went from house to house, street to street. The Romans showed no mercy. They killed everyone they found, men, women, and children. The narrow streets were so choked with bodies that the Romans had to stop to clear them so they could advance. Scipio, wanting to preserve the city's treasures, gave the order to burn the houses to the ground, often with the inhabitants still inside. The fire raged for days, consuming centuries of history, art, and culture. The last stand took place at the Byrsa, the city's citadel, where about 50,000 desperate survivors had taken refuge in the temple of Eschmoun. They pleaded with the Roman general for their lives, and Scipio agreed to spare them. They were marched out and sold into slavery. But the commander, Hasdrubal the Boeotarch, along with his wife, his 2 sons, and a handful of Roman deserters, refused to surrender. They retreated to the roof of the temple. As the flames licked at the walls, Hasdrubal, seeing the cause was lost, secretly came down and surrendered to Scipio. His wife, witnessing his betrayal, stood on the edge of the roof. She cursed her husband for his cowardice, threw her sons into the flames, and then followed them into the fire. It was a final horrifying act of defiance. Scipio Aemilianus, looking out over the smoking ruins of what was once one of the world's greatest cities, is said to have wept. He wasn't crying tears of joy, but of a profound sadness. He quoted a line from Homer's Iliad, thinking of the fates of great empires. "A day will come when sacred Troy shall perish, and Priam and his people shall be slain." He knew that one day, even mighty Rome might suffer the same fate. After the city was looted, the remaining structures were systematically demolished. The story of sowing salt into the soil is likely a later invention, a symbol for the absolute totality of the destruction. Carthage was erased from the map. The Romans had done what Cato had demanded. Carthage was destroyed. Its people were killed or enslaved, its culture annihilated, and its very name became a synonym for ultimate defeat. The fall of Carthage wasn't just the end of a war. It was the end of an era. It marked Rome's undisputed mastery over the Mediterranean. There were no more rivals. But it also serves as a chilling cautionary tale about the depths of fear, hatred, and the destructive nature of absolute power. The ghost of Carthage haunted Rome, a reminder of what it had done to secure its empire. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the past. If you found this story as compelling as we do, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more deep dives into history. We'll see you next time.